The ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia was reached only after Donald Trump threatened not to finalize trade negotiations if they didn't agree a peace deal. Cambodian authorities even publicly credited the U.S. president for his role in facilitating a truce. Now, this is not the first time that Trump has taken credit for solving international disputes. Here he is speaking on Monday after the Thai-Cambodian ceasefire was announced.
Some good news because the recent war that you just saw, they just announced, I see, the newest of the 5, now this would be 6 that we've stopped. I've stopped 6 wars in the last, I'm averaging about a war a month. I was dealing with 2 countries that we get along with very well, very different countries from certain standpoints. They've been fighting for 500 years, intermittently. And we solved that war. You probably saw it just came out over the wire, so we solved it through trade. I said, I don't want to trade with anybody that's killing each other, so we just got that one solved.
Let's dig into Donald Trump's peacemaking efforts and his use of trade as a tool. I'm very pleased to welcome Michael O'Hanlon, a senior fellow and director of research and foreign policy at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. So to start things off, how does Trump's rather transactional approach to foreign policy compare to what we've seen from other U.S. presidents?
Greetings. Well, I think it's completely different. And I'm guessing that most Europeans would agree with that assessment from my side of the Atlantic. Clearly, President Trump's been willing to threaten things that really no post-World War II American president ever did, most notably early on disengaging from Europe's security and even putting NATO at risk, although he seems to have walked back from that a good deal for the time being. And now, of course, his willingness to upend the entire international economic order that's been built painstakingly, again, based on lessons that were learned in the 1930s and 40s, that a world that went its own ways into different economic blocks might wind up at greater risk of not only economic setback, but war. And President Trump, whether he agrees with that historical assessment or not, doesn't seem to consider it very relevant to making economic policy in today's world. So the whole style of also exploiting these American laws that were written usually for a more specific purpose, but are now being essentially transformed into vehicles for unilateral presidential policymaking, that's also something we haven't seen. I don't know that it's a blatant violation of the law, but it's certainly pushing it as far as it possibly could be pushed. And that, too, is Donald Trump's style.
And if it's something that is unique, would you go as far as to say that we're seeing this as some kind of second-term Trump doctrine taking shape?
Well, I think it's always fun to talk about doctrines of President A, B, or C. Usually the doctrines aren't quite as, tight in providing explanatory power as people like me and think tanks sometimes want to say. I don't really know how to make sense of Trump's doctrine or what it would be. I do feel that the strongest statement I would make about security is that I'm breathing a half sigh of relief that he's actually not interested in breaking off most of our alliances. And that seemed to be an open question until the NATO summit in June. And so on that one, the Trump doctrine is sort of the absence of a Trump doctrine. It looked like he was going to potentially completely turn upside down Europe's security relationship with the United States, and so far he hasn't. On economics, however, perhaps you are right that we could talk about a more concrete Trump doctrine, which is very characteristic of his second term, and it builds on some of his ideas from the first term, but he's now made it much more categorical and systematic, and he's applying it to every major country or trading bloc in the world, trying to negotiate these tariffs using the leverage that he's decided Congress and the courts will let him employ in the process. And so I guess you could talk about at least a Trump economic doctrine at this point.
I mean, recently Trump said that if he weren't around, there would be 6 major wars happening. He's mentioned the conflict between India and Pakistan, also the dispute between Thailand and Cambodia, among others. Do we have to give him credit where credit is due here?
Well, I'm not going to give him discredit just yet. I was very worried that he would make the war over Ukraine worse. And I don't think he's made it better yet, but at least he understands clearly now who is the aggressor and who is the impediment to peace. And so that's progress. And yes, on some of these negotiated settlements on, the Thai-Cambodian border, for example, perhaps he used the good offices of the United States in a constructive way. I don't know that American presidents usually are the main cause of a peace deal from a, perch so far away. But if Trump wants to claim some partial credit, then I'd rather have him interested in helping the cause of peace than simply saying he doesn't care, or that those problems are so far away from America that they're not really America's problems. So I'm glad for the attitude. As usual with Donald Trump, there's a bit of bombast and a bit of exaggeration and a certain self-centeredness. But if it's for generally good motives based on generally correct analysis, then I'm not going to be too critical. With Gaza, again, I think his instincts are better than they were, but not yet translating into any real improvement in the trajectory of the conflict or the humanitarian tragedy. And so I'm not going to, again, give him credit, but I won't criticize either. I think at least he's getting his head around these problems 6 months into his presidency and generally pushing in the right direction on most of them.
Yeah, it's interesting that you see this trajectory during his administration. I do want to talk to you more about Ukraine, which you've mentioned. He campaigned on ending the war in 24 hours. That clearly hasn't happened. Here, he's also threatening to use trade, this time in the form of secondary tariffs on China and India to try to punish Vladimir Putin. Do you think that that could be an effective strategy? Maybe.
I think that India and China have been, frankly, like the rest of us, trying to have it both ways in this war. And frankly, in the West, we've done a little bit of that too. We haven't wanted to ban people from trading with Russia. We still maintain some trade ourselves. We want countries to buy Russian oil, and we just tried to lower the price so Russia wouldn't make quite as much money, hoping we could find this Goldilocks solution of not too hot, not too cold, keep the world economy going, but put some pain on Russia. Well, that didn't work out. And maybe all of us need to reassess whether it's time for tougher pressure. And so I think Trump's generally correct. We're going to need more leverage against Putin. And I hope that he doesn't pursue his additional tariffs in such a way that he really divides the United States from India and China. I would hope that they could be brought along, or at least India be brought along, into acknowledging that at the moment, what we've been doing just isn't enough. And it's no one's fault. It's Vladimir Putin's fault, but it's not really China's fault, India's fault, or America's or Europe's fault. And we need to collectively, therefore, rethink our strategy and figure out how to put more pressure on Russia altogether. That's the way I would hope that he might frame it. And if he does that, I think he's correct.
I suppose one last question I would put to you then is, do you see a transactional approach that's determined on a case-by-case basis to foreign policy making America more or less secure? I suppose I'm curious whether there are risks in treating diplomacy like business deals.
Well, there's definitely a lot of risk. And who knows, for example, how the Chinese are reading our behavior and what that would mean about our ability to deter a Chinese attack on Taiwan. If China senses that the United States is preoccupied or disinterested or has turned against Taiwan at some future date because we've had some trade dispute with them, does that somehow give a green light to Beijing? I mean, there are a lot of bad things that could happen. So your question is completely apropos. I don't know what will happen next. I am relieved, however, that even though he's been belligerent rhetorically and verbally, just as he was in his first term, so far President Trump has not wanted to break off alliances or long-term partnerships with most of America's key friends. Everything has a different style with him at the helm. And I don't consider it myself very statesmanlike, but it's a little bit better than transactional. It does build on some longstanding relationships, and he's avoided just jettisoning those, throwing them all away. So I am hopeful that, he will keep finding his way towards a distinctly Trumpian, but still partially continuous way of playing a leadership role in the world. 6 months in, I would just say, I guess it's a little bit too early for me to be sure, but I'm relieved that the relationships he's built have not been purely transactional. I also see some long-standing American principles and ethics still holding up in some of these cases.
Michael, thank you so much for your nuanced analysis today. We've been speaking with Michael O'Hanlon at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
The uneasy ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia appears to be holding, despite allegations of skirmishes from Bangkok. Now, the deal was agreed during talks in Malaysia following days of clashes along their disputed frontier. Dozens were killed and hundreds of thousands displaced, some of whom are slowly returning to their homes.
Military commanders from Cambodia and Thailand met face to face. This despite Bangkok's claim that the truce had been broken overnight. Cambodia denied it, saying there had been no new fighting. Cambodia pledges to respect and adhere to the principles of international law, to live together peacefully, and to work towards bilateral cooperation in order to find just and long-lasting solutions to the situation. Both sides agreed to freeze troop movements that could trigger new clashes after 5 days of fighting killed over 40 people and displaced more than 300,000. After the guns fell silent, some displaced residents in Thailand began heading home. But trust remains fragile.
I still don't feel comfortable. This is the first day after they announced it. I'm not confident. If it breaks out again, I'll have to go.
On the Cambodian side, too, many still carry scars from past border clashes, fueled by a colonial-era map and a dispute that stretches back more than a century.
I want the soldiers to stop fighting, to shake hands and start working together, because our lives have become difficult from always being on the run.
As families sift through what is left, the hope is not just to rebuild homes, but to rebuild trust across the border, so the fragile calm can turn into lasting peace.